Welcome, everybody, to my new podcast, Punching Back with George Papadopoulos. It's an incredible time to be alive in this country and to be launching this podcast as the IG is testifying. Let's just jump right into what's going on right now. We've been hearing about this FISA abuse report for months. It was delayed for a long time. People really didn't know exactly what was going to be in it up until a couple of weeks ago, when all of a sudden you started to have these strategic leaks by the New York Times and the Washington Post and other friendly newspapers to operatives who are basically trying to get ahead of the story. And from what it looks like, this is a very damning report, and it's really an indictment of the FBI and their activities towards the Trump campaign in 2016 and all the way into the Trump administration in 2017. Clearly, John Durham and William Barr took the extraordinary step to publicly, almost refute the core findings, if you will, of this report, and that is that the legal basis was not justified to actually launch a counterintelligence investigation into a rival presidential campaign, and that the IG did not have the type of information or methods and sources that John Durham does have, and he's going to be using to get to the bottom of how other intel agencies were used to also spy, entrap, and basically set up the campaign. So clearly, this is not the end. This is just the beginning. This report is opening up a brand new door into Durham's investigation. So I'm actually going to read directly from the quotes that John Durham and the Attorney General William Barr made on Monday when the report was publicly released. U.S. Attorney John Durham, who's actually leading a criminal investigation into the origins of the Russia probe. He's the one who's going abroad. He's meeting with foreign governments, interrogating the CIA, and trying to figure out exactly how many foreign governments were actually interfering in the election, how the CIA might have been involved as well. And he has the ability to convene a grand jury, impanel a grand jury, subpoena witnesses, and even prosecute them if they committed crimes. So it's a much different situation than Horowitz, who really didn't have that ability. And so what Durham said, basically, and I'm quoting from him, is, "I have the utmost respect for the mission of the Office of Inspector General and the comprehensive work that went into the report prepared by Mr. Horowitz and his staff. However," and this is a big however, "our investigation is not limited to developing information from within component parts of the Justice Department. Our investigation has included developing information from other persons and entities, both in the U.S. and outside of the U.S., based on the evidence collected to date. And while our investigation is ongoing, last month, we advised the Inspector General that we do not agree with some of the report's conclusions as to the predication and how the FBI case was opened." So this is very interesting because you have the IG basically taking the FBI at its word and the Crossfire Hurricane team at its word. And when I get into the report, who have just started reading this report, immediately saw a lot of problems in this report that I'm going to lay out right now. But the IG basically says that the FBI had a legal basis for launching this counterintelligence investigation after I had a random conversation with an Australian diplomat. That's basically the New York Times narrative that was propagated for 2 years, and it's clearly not the correct narrative, or else John Durham would have said it was correct. And then you also have William Barr, the AG, coming out with his own comment, stating, "The Inspector General's report now makes clear that the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential campaign on the thinnest of suspicions that, in my view, were insufficient to justify the steps taken. It is also clear that, from its inception, the evidence produced by the investigation was consistently exculpatory." And we're going to get into that. That's a very important term for everybody. You might have heard of this term. It means people confessing their innocence, but that information not presented to a court before the FBI gets warrants on American citizens. "Nevertheless, the investigation and surveillance was pushed forward for the duration of the campaign and deep into President Trump's administration. In the rush to obtain and maintain FISA surveillance of Trump campaign associates, FBI officials misled the FISA court, omitted critical exculpatory facts from their filings, and suppressed or ignored information negating the reliability of their principal source, Christopher Steele. The Inspector General found the explanations given for these actions unsatisfactory. While most of the misconduct identified by the Inspector General was committed in 2016 and 2017 by a small group of now former FBI officials, the malfeasance and misfeasance detailed in the Inspector General's report reflects a clear abuse of the FISA process. Now, for everybody who doesn't understand, this is the guy who runs the Justice Department in this country, and he oversees the FBI and the other intel agencies. And he's essentially indicting his own agency for doing basically almost an illicit investigation into a presidential campaign. So the combination of John Durham and William Barr's statements essentially are summarized as the following. There was really no legal basis or a justified predicate to investigate the Trump campaign. And now we're going to explain exactly why there wasn't. And we have the power to do it. We have the resources to do it. And the IG can do it because this was all happening abroad. The first couple months that I was joining the Trump campaign, when I officially was on the Trump campaign, I was in Europe. And immediately upon joining the Trump campaign, even before the Washington Post knew that I was joining the Trump campaign, a lot of foreign officials just happened to know that I would have a role on this campaign. And that's when I met individuals like Joseph Mifsud, who we're going to get into as we move forward, Stefan Halper, Putin's fake niece, Azra Turk, Alexander Downer, Erica Thompson, officials from the DIA, CIA in Athens. I mean, it's as if the whole world's intel agencies collapsed on my lap within a week of joining this campaign. And there's a reason for that. I mean, the IG, he did make something very clear. He had 3 points, and I want to, I took some notes here, and I want to get to these 3 points, which I thought were very fascinating. Out of the over 450 times my name, over 350 times my name was brought up, I was able to quickly look through why my name was brought up so much, and I came up with 3 bullet points. And in my opinion, the 3 critical findings of the IG report that I discovered, which I think are going to really set the framework for the other investigation, meaning Durham, is that I and others were spied on before and after joining and leaving the Trump campaign. Now, just think about what I just said. If Michael Flynn, myself, and Carter Page, and maybe Paul Manafort are being investigated illicitly or spied upon before we're joining a presidential campaign, what does that actually mean? It means that when I was on Ben Carson's campaign, that campaign was being spied on because I was on Ben Carson's campaign before I joined Donald Trump's campaign. It also suggests to me that Crossfire Hurricane wasn't a random, spontaneous investigation that was just launched like this in July of 2016. It clearly shows that this was a methodically planned, pre-planned, orchestrated investigation that would essentially entrap members of the campaign by using foreign agencies to do it. Michael Flynn, the great Mike Flynn, I think he's a great patriot in this country. Something strange that I found out just probably a month ago, along with the rest of America. In 2015, he had Stefan Halper, who we're going to get into, spying on him, and Joseph Mifsud spying on him. So isn't it bizarre that the 2 guys that were looking into Michael Flynn in 2015 just happened to fall into my lap in 2016? If there was no investigation or no surveillance on Americans affiliated with a rival presidential campaign or campaigns going against the Democratic Party, I think that's a little suspicious. The second big point I found was that there were U.S. allies that were leveraged to conduct spying on American citizens. I think that's almost mainstream now. The president himself has called out Australia, the UK, Ukraine, and even Italy for conducting operations against the campaign directly or indirectly. And part of why I think Durham's probe actually became criminal in nature was after he left Italy, where he was there discussing Joseph Mifsud with Italian officials. They must have told him something that didn't mesh with either the FBI story or the mainstream media's narrative about the collusion narrative that Joseph Mifsud was a Russian agent. So we're going to talk about him moving forward. And the third major point was that the FBI embedded spies within the Trump campaign. This is something that they tried to distance themselves from by saying that one of the guy's handlers didn't realize he was part of the campaign when he was spying on him, and he only spoke about it when he left the campaign. So they're playing a lot with words and trying to confuse people. So I didn't see anything good that came out of this for the FBI. I really would characterize this as a basically an electronic government-sponsored break-in of the Trump campaign that makes Watergate look like small potatoes. I mean, Watergate were some burglars who were broke in, they acted foolishly, some got arrested, and Nixon, for covering up something he shouldn't have covered up, ended up resigning. In this case, this was an I mean, we were violated. There's no other way to say it. I mean, as Americans working for the Donald Trump campaign and Ben Carson campaign, like I was, our civil liberties were essentially thrown out the window. We were basically under watch as if we were enemy combatants, terrorists, or narco traffickers. FISA warrants were issued on the campaign. And, many people have probably heard the word FISA, but do you really know what a FISA warrant is? It's a surveillance list warrant, which is supposed to be classified, and it's usually designed for either foreign spies or terrorists, so that you could basically look into their lives, eavesdrop on them, wiretap them, look into their past, predict their future, know what they ate in the morning, look through their emails or telephone records, and even follow and basically examine the communications they have with people around them. So it's a very intrusive warrant, and one was executed on Carter Page. Now Carter Page um, is an individual who was never charged with a crime, is somebody who never met candidate Donald Trump, is somebody that I met once in my life. I think he's a nice person, but how he became the key man of this entire investigation with me, it just makes my mouth drop. While Carter Page actually has been to Russia, had Russian contacts, maybe nothing nefarious, I have never even traveled to Russia. I've never met a Russian official in my life. So it's incredibly strange that somebody like myself could be at the center of a Russia conspiracy. So these are just some of the main points we're going to be looking into. How did I get involved in this? Why? Why did the IG come out with these findings? And what do I expect moving forward for Durham's probe? And how is that going to impact the 2020 election? But before we get into those major issues moving forward, I want to get into the actual IG report. And there's been a lot of a well-known Cambridge professor by the name of Stefan Halper has become kind of cult-like spy figure of some sort, even though he really wasn't. And apparently, he was tasked with spying on me, according to the IG, in 2016 and on Michael Flynn in 2015. And there's a whole story behind that with this young academic named Svetlana Lokova and Richard Dearlove, the ex-head of the MI6, and how that all happened with Flynn. But in my case, you know, in the summer of 2016, in September 2016, as Trump obviously is a nominee, he's obviously doing great. It looks like he's going to win. Hillary had a lot of problems at that point. I get an unsolicited email out of the blue from a random guy. I had no idea who this person was, Stefan Halper. He characterizes himself as this Cambridge professor who wants to basically pay me to go to London to write this report on the energy issues in the Mediterranean, pay a five-star accommodation, my flight, etc. And at that point, I had no issue. That's how I used to make my living, writing those type of reports, going to conferences and, those kind of things. So there's nothing odd about it. I did a simple Google search on him. I saw he was at Cambridge and he worked with a couple presidents, so I thought he was legit. I fly out to London and I meet this famous blonde bombshell, Azra Turk, who was his assistant, who began to try and seduce me and try and get me to say stuff that, of course, I had no knowledge of and set me up. And then she introduces me to her, I guess, her handler, or she was handling him, Stefan Halper, because Azra Turk actually isn't in the IG report. So clearly she wasn't part of the FBI. It looks like she was working with the CIA, and that's what the next investigation is going to look into. So I'm scrolling through the report. I'm on page 329, and I see a headline that states Source Two's meetings with George Papadopoulos. Now, from the report, it looks like there were at least 5 to 7 informants, confidential human sources, spies, whatever you want to call them, meeting with me from 2016 to the summer of 2017, allegedly trying to get me to say something that I had no information about. They clearly knew I had no information about anything related to Russia because, these people, meaning the FBI and the CIA and other intel agencies, they know what you had for breakfast before you ate it, basically. And the last thing they would have thought was this guy really is conspiring with Russia when all they had to do was Google me and figure out that I've never even traveled to the country. So clearly they were trying to basically get me to say things or rumors that were out there and just for me to confirm them to create this conspiracy with the Trump campaign. And that's why they never had a case and why basically the FBI really took a hit here to their reputation by this IG report. A lot of people are speculating who source one, two, three are in the IG report. And I'm here to confirm for the first time ever that source two is Stefan Halper, this infamous professor that has been talked about for months, possibly a year now, with no one really being able to confirm who he was working for or how he fits into this entire story. And for the first time ever, I, as the guy who lived this spy story with this individual, am able to confirm that source two in the IG report is indeed Stefan Halper. And immediately I found issues in the IG report that I'm going to explain right now. And I'm going to read directly from it. Uh, this is on page 329. At the direction of the Crossfire Hurricane team, Source 2, Stefan Halper, invited Papadopoulos to meet with Source 2 in September 2016 to discuss a project. Case Agent 1, we don't know who that is, said that the Crossfire Hurricane team thought it would play to Papadopoulos' ego to help take part in a project. Okay, whatever that means. The project was based on Papadopoulos' past writings about the Leviathan oil fields off the coast of Israel and Turkey and was not related to Papadopoulos' role in the Trump campaign. This is a big problem. What the FBI, I should say the Comey/Strzok FBI, because the FBI are great people, okay? They protect us daily, and I'm not here to tarnish the FBI. It's never been my goal, and I don't want to do that. But of course, we did have some bad apples in leadership that really put a stain on the institution. I think the majority of people could probably agree with that, whether you're on the left or on the right. Now, when I was hired on both Carson's and Trump's campaign, my strong point or my selling point were my ties to this exact situation that I'm being paid to do. Israel, oil fields, Hudson Institute, contacts in Europe. That was my selling point. Initially to Corey Lewandowski, then to Barry Bennett on the Carson campaign, and then obviously throughout my work on the Trump campaign, I traveled a lot to Israel too, where I was even quoted in the Jerusalem Post as a member of the Trump campaign discussing what Trump would do with Israel. So then you go here and it says this was not related to Papadopoulos' role in the Trump campaign. So what they're trying to do here is they're trying to basically distance their investigation from the campaign as a whole and argue that there were only a couple problematic guys on this campaign and we had to look into them, of course. So I'm conducting research, giving policy position papers to the campaign on this particular issue, and they're saying this has nothing to do with the campaign or me. So this is a lie. And there's a lot of this in the report, and we're going to get into that moving forward of how the FBI is manipulating paragraphs and words to try and make it seem like something it's not. The Crossfire Hurricane agents told the OIG that they were trying to recreate the conditions that resulted in Papadopoulos' comments to the friendly foreign government officials about the suggestion from Russia that it could assist the Trump campaign by anonymously releasing derogatory information about presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. All right, let's go. Let's stop here. Friendly foreign government, Australia. Okay, the story, the narrative, which is clearly going to be debunked, is that the Australian government just wanted to meet with me out of the blue on May 10th, 2016, to talk about any issue. And all of a sudden, at this meeting with this random diplomat, I just tell him, hey, the Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton. That's the narrative that the FBI wants the people to believe. That's what the New York Times propagated. And clearly, that's the story that they're basically lying to the OIG about here. There's nothing further from the truth. And let me explain why Australia is actually in the crossfire of this new probe that Durham and Barr are now leading. On April 20th, 2016, the Australian government reached out to me for the first time while I was in London. Okay. And this is why dates matter and chronology is incredibly important when trying to understand this story, because people who have tried to explain even bits of my story and this huge scandal can't do it because they don't know the chronology. So they might tell you that this happened with this guy, but they never connect everything. So I'm here to connect it for the first time because this is my story. On April 20th, 2016, the Australian government reached out to me to meet with me in London out of the blue. Donald Trump never mentioned the word Australia in the campaign. I've never been to Australia. I have nothing to do with Australia. And I have absolutely no idea why the Australian government would want to meet with me essentially a month after I join the Trump campaign, or 3 weeks after I join the Trump campaign. Nevertheless, I go to this meeting with this person, Erica Thompson. Erica Thompson is allegedly an Australian diplomat working at the embassy in London. But if you actually dig into her background a little bit more, you'll see that she has an intel background. She's meeting with me, and essentially she's telling me Trump is a pariah. Australia hates him. There's no way we can have him win. He's going to be a disaster for the world. He's going to affect our trade relations. And at that time, the Australians were really pushing this global trade agreement called the TPP that Trump was completely against. And I was just sitting there kind of nodding, trying to figure out exactly why this US ally is talking so horrible about the candidate. And it really echoed what the UK prime minister did about 3 months before that, where he was essentially calling Donald Trump stupid, divisive, and wrong, and basically saying that, this isn't somebody that we can actually work with, so we can't take him serious. So you have the UK and Australia making these disparaging remarks about the candidate that I'm working for. I'm absorbing this. 6 days later, 6 days later, on April 26th, who comes into my life again? Joseph Mifsud. Joseph Mifsud is the overseas professor who told me one day over lunch in London that the Russians have Hillary Clinton's emails, okay? He's almost taken on a mythological character now, where people don't know who he is, what he was all about, where he is. He's been missing for 2 years, and no one knows anything about him except clearly John Durham and William Barr found out something about him while they went to Italy recently. And on April 26th, unsolicited, over lunch, as I'm finishing my lunch, he tells me, hey, George, the Russians have Hillary's emails. Okay, that was a rumor that had been circulating for months, actually, at that point. But right now, you have a guy telling a Trump campaign advisor this information. And what I think was going on here is that the Australians had reached out to basically make it clear that they were keeping tabs on me in London. You had Joseph Mifsud come out 6 days later to drop this information in my lap. And then who comes back into my life about 11 days later? The Australian government again. And that's where Alexander Downer comes out of the blue. Hi, I want to meet with you. My Erica Thompson told me to meet with you and we should meet. Okay. I go and meet with him. Essentially, I feel he's recording me, he's spying on me, he's acting very belligerent towards the candidates, and he's trying to divert the conversation into a way I don't want it to go. He's bringing up Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, talking about various things, Russia, allegedly. And he then tells somebody, the State Department, the FBI, the Australian government, whoever, that oh, this guy Papadopoulos told me that the Russians have dirt on Clinton. So when Barr, and then that of course justified the opening of Crossfire Hurricane in theory. So when Barr goes back and Durham say that there was really no justification for opening an investigation, and when Trump says he wants Australia to be investigated, we need to look at those 2 weeks and exactly what was going on between April 20th and May 10th. From the first meeting with the Australians to Joseph Mifsud coming into my life to then the Australians wanting to meet again to essentially retrieve the information that Joseph Mifsud had planted on me 10 days before. It looks like a setup. I think the investigators have a conspiracy case that they're looking into. It's obviously very sensitive because we're talking about a country that is part of the Five Eyes intelligence alliance with the U.S. And the Five Eyes intelligence system is it's an alliance made up of the U.S., New Zealand, Canada, the U.K., and Australia, where essentially each other's countries can spy on one another's citizens, and that they can share the most up-to-date, sensitive information on one another's citizens. So it's not a secret, or it's not shocking to me that you would have the Australians actually being weaponized to do the dirty work of whoever was leading them to do this, because they're part of this Five Eyes intelligence system that allows them to spy on Americans. And I, as an American citizen working for a presidential campaign, wouldn't it make a lot more sense for either the CIA or whoever was actually running the spying against us abroad to bring in a bozo like Alexander Downer to have a drink with me and to try and get me to say something instead of bringing in an FBI agent or somebody working from the US Embassy? It looks like that's what they were trying to do. And the reason I say this now about Downer is because, as I just read from this report, the FBI essentially states here that they wanted me to recreate the scenario I had with Downer. Now, if Downer was such a substantial resource, and if his tip really was what launched the investigation, why would the FBI need me to meet Stefan Halper in London, pay me money to tell him allegedly what I told Alexander Downer? They wouldn't have to. It's clear from my perspective that Stefan Halper and Downer were connected. And Stefan Halper's role here was to cover up what Downer was doing. Because the last thing you really did want is to put the heat on Australia for bringing in a diplomat to essentially entrap a campaign operative. So the FBI admits it right here in the report. We wanted Papadopoulos to recreate the same scenario he'd had with Downer. And actually, they're absolutely right. With Alexander Downer, he wanted to know all about my business in the Middle East, what I was up to in the energy world in Israel, with the UK, what Trump thought about China, Russia, Turkey. So the two conversations I had with Downer and Halper were the same. And if Halper was a spy, which is clear here, it's obvious that Downer was in on something that he shouldn't have been doing against me. Unfortunately for them, Halper got exposed. Not sure exactly uh, how that whole situation happened. I do know that I had my suspicions about Halper. Had conversations with some journalists about him, and clearly after those conversations, there was a revelation that this guy was essentially a spy for one of the intel agencies. But in this report, they don't mention the girl Azra Turk that was with him, and I find that to be very strange because they just completely omit her as if she doesn't exist. They just talk about source two, Stefan Halper, but they don't mention Azra Turk, who was a Turkish national who was working alongside him and likely was handling Halper. So maybe that wasn't in the purview of the IG because he could only look into the FBI. And it's clear that she might have been working with a different intel agency. And even the New York Times wrote that she was a government informant of some nature, but never clarified exactly what that was. So basically, it goes on to then talk about what he was paying me for, to explain that the OGC unit chief told the OIG that because the operation targeted Papadopoulos individually and wasn't directed at anything related to the campaign, she thought it was appropriate. Now, they're targeting me. I'm a campaign advisor at that time, working directly with the highest levels of the campaign. And I think during that month, I was actually organizing the meeting that Donald Trump had with the president of Egypt, with Steve Bannon. So I was central in the campaign at that point. And two, what they were monitoring me for was what I was contributing to the campaign, and that was all my contacts in the Middle East. So I'm not exactly clear. It's not clear here why they're trying to just say this had nothing to do with the campaign, except that they're obviously trying to make an argument that this wasn't about the whole campaign, but about four bad dudes named Papadopoulos, Page, Manafort, and Flynn. So it continues to go on here to basically transcribe my conversation with him, which is completely exculpatory. In this document, you have Stefan Halper basically trying to probe me or push me to say things that he knows I know nothing about. And I'm basically telling him that what you're talking about is treason. Donald Trump and the campaign have absolutely nothing to do with Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. We have no idea what WikiLeaks is doing. We would never be involved with that. And what you're even suggesting alone is treason. And I was getting, pissed off at that point. This is all happening over drinks in London. I have absolutely no idea that this guy is some sort of spy. I'm there. The last thing I'd be doing is talking to the guy if I knew he was a spy. He's wearing a wire. He's recording everything I'm saying, or essentially I'm telling him I'm innocent and no one on the campaign did anything wrong 2 months before the election. Yet, this critical information from page 329, 330, 331, 332, and 333 was omitted intentionally from the FISA court when they went and got a FISA warrant against the campaign. Now, something that made me laugh, the argument for why they felt they had to omit this very, very exculpatory information, just like William Barr mentioned, there was a lot of exculpatory information that was left out, is because they said, we felt that Papadopoulos was being coached to just say this to our informants and that he was lying. So they're trying to basically say that Papadopoulos is talking to a random guy. He has no idea as a spy, but he's being coached and it's not true what he's saying. So we had to omit this for national security grounds. That's essentially a crime. It's part of this pattern of behavior by the FBI, by other intel agencies, of withholding this type of information, basically that would have highlighted our innocence from the court, that really has made this such a problematic issue for the FBI, and Comey and Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. And I think Americans, both on the right and the left, should really coalesce together and call a spade and say what happened here was wrong. This should never have happened to a presidential campaign or Americans, and that we should hold these government officials and these unelected bureaucrats accountable. Is it enough that they just were fired or resigned? I don't know. There's obviously a criminal referral here towards Kevin Kleinsmith, the FBI lawyer who altered the FISA document email that actually resulted in the FBI getting it. Now, Kevin Kleinsmith was the DOJ attorney who interviewed me. And if this guy is under criminal investigation, what on earth was he doing interrogating me in February of 2017? I don't know. And that's a serious reason why I'm looking into all my options right now, and I'm putting together a legal team, and we're going to get to the bottom of this. And if I have to sue people, I'm going to do it. Because clearly, from all of these shady characters, and we haven't even gotten into all of them, and we're going to get into those in the future, where you have informants and people trying to recreate scenarios that were never true in the beginning, and then Americans saying they're innocent, and even though they say they're innocent, that's not being shown to the court. And after that, the same lawyer who is under criminal investigation today, is interviewing me to try and get me to repeat same nonsense that Stefan Halper and others were trying to do. This looks like it's a conspiracy. I think it is a conspiracy case that the Attorney General and William Barr are looking into. And moving forward, it's going to be very clear that this report, Horowitz's report, was definitely the beginning and not the end. You're not going to want to miss any of my insights regarding this report, its impact on Durham's investigation, and obviously Durham's investigation on the 2020 election. So make sure you subscribe to the Himalaya app or wherever you listen to or watch podcasts. Thanks so much.